I worked as the head of IT for a mid-sized logistics company for 10 years, and I built their entire tracking system from the ground up using a custom database that was specifically tailored to their needs. The owner was a great guy, but he retired last year and handed the company over to his son Greg, who is the definition of a micromanager with zero technical knowledge. Greg immediately started cutting costs by firing experienced staff and replacing them with cheaper and experienced workers, which caused a lot of issues. But I managed to keep the servers running by working overtime without extra pay last Monday. Greg called me into his office and told me that he was letting me go effective immediately because he found a more dynamic candidate who could do my job for half the salary. I knew exactly who this candidate was because Greg had been parading his 22-year-old nephew around the office. For weeks, the kid didn't know the difference between a server and a modem. But Greg didn't care about competence. He only cared about hiring family. I was furious, but I stayed professional and asked if he wanted me to do a handover period to train the new guy on the legacy systems. Greg laughed and said his nephew was a digital native and didn't need training from a dinosaur like me, and then he had security escort me out of the building like a criminal. He wouldn't even let me clear my browser history or grab my personal files. What Greg didn't know, or didn't care to ask, was that the entire system required a manual administrative authentication every 7 days. Or it would go into a security lockdown mode to prevent hacking. It was a feature the old owner insisted on years ago after a data breach scare. I was the only one with the authentication key. I went home and decided to take a nice long vacation without checking my phone. 3 days later the call started. First it was the nephew leaving a voicemail asking for the Wi-Fi password, which I ignored. Then it was the HR director asking where the employee files were by day 7, which was yesterday. The real panic set in. I turned my phone on this morning to find 56 missed calls and hundreds of texts from Greg. The system had missed its weekly authentication and had initiated the lockdown protocol, which encrypts all the data and shuts down external access to the shipping manifest. Their trucks were sitting in loading docks unable to move because nobody knew what was on them or where they were supposed to go. Greg left me a voicemail screaming that he was going to sue me if I didn't come in and fix it immediately. I called him back and put him on speaker while I made coffee. He started yelling that I had sabotaged the system, but I calmly explained that the system was working exactly as designed and that I had offered to do a handover, which he refused. He went quiet and asked me to just give him the password. I told him that since I was no longer an employee, providing that information would be consulting work. He asked how much. I told him my consulting rate is $500 an hour with a minimum 40-hour retainer, paid upfront. He cursed at me and hung up. 2 hours later, I got a notification from my bank that $20,000 had been wired to my account. I emailed him the authentication key and a PDF manual on how to maintain the system. I heard from a friend still at the company that they lost 3 major contracts during the downtime, and the nephew quit because it was distressful. Greg is still the boss, but he hasn't looked me in the eye since. I am currently using the retainer money to fund a trip to Europe while I look for a new job.